Hello, everybody. How are you today? Happy Monday to all. I'm very excited to be back here with you today. I'm trying something new here. We're actually live on Facebook as usual. We're also live on our YouTube channel. If those of you who are following us on Facebook or Instagram who don't follow us on YouTube, make sure to check it out. A lot of tip videos as well as these Mindset Monday series and other content on that platform as well. So worth checking out. So thanks again for joining us here for our fourth Mindset Monday. This is part of an ongoing series where we're tackling different components of the mindset, specifically mindset of a CPA candidate, and exploring how some of these different mindsets or different ideas that you may have floating around in your mind while you're studying and preparing for these exams can actually impact your performance, your overall score, can most importantly maybe impact your experience of the CPA exam. It could have you going from an experience where it's really rich in learning, not only in the content of the exams, but also rich in learning about yourself and how you best operate. Or you could have an experience that is really painful, full of a lot of suffering and frustration. So I guess of the two, which one would you choose, right? I think most people would go for, well, I'd like to learn about myself and I'd like to learn this content and ultimately perform really well on the exam. So that's where this series came from. And today, specifically, we're diving into this idea that you can always push back your CPA exam. Prometric has, it's not all their fault, of course, but they have almost done us a disservice in making it so easy to reschedule exams. So easy and so low cost, at least if you do it with enough planning. So a comment that I hear very often when I'm talking with CPA candidates is, well, it's no problem. If I don't feel ready, I will just push my exam back. It's only $35, no big deal. And it's an interesting thought. It seems really sort of harmless on the surface. But what I want to talk to you about today and share with you are some client examples and some deeper understandings or sort of peek behind the curtain to see how this might not actually, this subtle thought of I'm just going to move my test back could actually be impacting you in a whole lot of other ways and negatively impacting your experience. So where this becomes a problem is when you hold it as your default mindset. So what I mean by that is that in the background, it might not be a conscious thought of yours every day or regularly while you're studying, but occasionally or sort of in the background, you have this idea that even if I'm not ready, if at any point I feel like this isn't working out or I'm not as prepared as I want to be, or I just am feeling nervous or, get a little bit stressed about this exam, I can always reschedule the exam. So it's usually, like I said, as a default mindset, it's running in the background. This may not be conscious thought that you experience on a regular basis, but it's a way that we provide ourselves this proverbial back door, this exit ramp. Whenever the stress or the pressure gets too high, we can just release that pressure instantly by rescheduling the exam, by kicking the can down the road. It's almost like when a little kid, if they bump their head, they might run to mom and dad and say, do you know what I need? I need a Band-Aid. When we know that for a bump, something that's not bleeding or an open wound, a Band-Aid is not going to do too much to help. What might really help is ice or, a cold compress of some kind, maybe a Tylenol or an Advil to reduce the pain and some swelling and things like that. But what they want is a Band-Aid. And similarly, rescheduling the exam often is not the main issue at play here. It's a symptom. We've got something else underlying. There's actually something else that may help you more than rescheduling the exam, but where our mind goes to automatically is, I better reschedule. I'm just not ready. So that's what we should dive into further. So it does feel good. It releases the pressure, but there are negative impacts. I hinted to it a little bit already that this actually provides a backdoor, an exit, a safety net, a way for us to sort of pull the ripcord and have our parachute come out, right? So we don't have to face the music. We don't have to go and actually sit for the exam if we're not feeling like it. Now, don't get me wrong, there are scenarios, and I'll share one with you in a moment. There are scenarios where it makes sense to reschedule your exam, 100%. But what we're talking about right now are those where we're using it as an excuse or a backdoor or a safety net. So some of the negative impacts that I see, longer term effects of rescheduling exams or having this idea that I can reschedule at any time as your default mindset. First of all, that goes a long way in killing any motivation that you have. It opens the door for procrastination and those types of habits to creep in. Because if you don't have to commit to that date, if you are not set on taking your exam that particular date, those days that we all have, those days that come around where you just don't feel like studying, where there's all sorts of factors at play in your life or other circumstances at work, right? When everything is stacked against you and you just do not feel like studying. If you've got this idea that I can reschedule anytime, I'm not married to, or I'm not set with this date, then you don't have to study. It's a great excuse to not do it or to not do as much as you had intended to do. Maybe, if the going gets rough during a study session, it makes it a whole lot easier to sort of quit while you're ahead or quit while you're behind, if that's the situation, and not push on, not keep going and meeting your goals. So your studying overall is going to lack urgency, right? There's this opportunity for procrastination to creep in. And also, that just creates a nice soft home for your fears, right? Procrastination is often a result of some sort of underlying fear. We wouldn't procrastinate on it if it was easy or, quick and something we knew we could absolutely crush every single time we take it on, right? We do those things right away. It's the things that are a little bit scary or unknown that we often procrastinate on, or that are harder, or things that reflect to us that we don't have it all together, right? We don't like to do the activities that we're not as strong at. So that procrastination may also show up, particularly when you're getting to an area of the studying that you're not as strong in. So maybe you don't procrastinate on doing the reading, but when it comes to actually doing questions or doing simulations, then you procrastinate, right? Then if I don't get to this, I can just push my test back so that I don't have to feel that pain or discomfort or frustration or fear right now. I can kick that can down the road. And then once you fall off track, right? Once we fall into this habit of deciding that we can reschedule, deciding that that date is sort of subjective for us, that exam date, not studying, we fall off track with our sin. And then it's very difficult to either get back caught up. So you almost force your own hand. We actually get into a situation where it is almost impossible for you to get caught up and do a thorough enough job of studying and preparing for that exam date. So you have to push it back. Or it's just from a motivation standpoint, very difficult to get going again, right? The further behind you get, that can be more and more demotivating. And let's face it, one thing that candidates do not need less of is motivation. If anything, we often need more motivation. We have underestimated how much motivation it's truly going to take for us to get through this exam all the way to the finish line. So, question to you is, if you're noticing that you struggle with this idea, this constant thought, or at least thought in the background about rescheduling your exams, the first question I'll throw to you is, do you have a habit of setting unrealistic expectations for yourself? That's one function of this. That if you're consistently setting goals for yourself or setting targets in terms of the exam date that are not realistic, that don't take your life and those factors that are at play for you into consideration, then that's something that we need to look at, because that's going to constantly put you in a position to have to potentially reschedule these exams. Now, if you think you've set pretty realistic targets and instead you're something else is getting in the way that's causing you to think you need to reschedule, then let's dig into that further. What are you consistently letting get in the way of your studying? Is there something that is taking higher priority that need maybe some stronger boundaries around to allow you to stick with that study plan? For example, work. That's a big one. A lot of my clients really struggle with saying no or setting boundaries at work or managing expectations at work and not putting that ahead of the study time. So in other words, a work priority pops up and now immediately studying is put on the back burner or put off for the day because of that default idea that in fact, this is a subjective deadline, right? I can move that deadline. It's a moving target. So it's not as pressing as these things at work. So what are you constantly or persisting in letting take higher priority than your studying? Again, that's the thing that we can address. It's not the Band-Aid of pushing your exam back, but we need to address that underlying issue. That's where we can put some structures and have you be aware, more consciously aware of those things that get in your way so that you can do something about it to prevent this from happening ongoingly. The other thing that you could consider, or that I'd invite you to think about, is what do you persist in doing that doesn't align with this goal of the CPA exam? So back when I was studying for the exam, I used to often be swayed by peer pressure to go out to a party on Saturday night when I knew I needed to spend a lot of hours on Sunday studying for upcoming exams. So it could be social pressures. It could be, saying yes to things at work. It could be saying yes to volunteer opportunities or yes to Netflix. So what are those things that you're spending time doing? What do you persist in doing that are actually in the way of or not supportive of your goal of passing the CPA exam? Not only your goal, but also your timeline of passing the exam. So it may not be a question of, do I do those things or not do them, but do I do them now or can they wait till after this exam? So that all comes back to planning, right? Are you planning appropriately so that you don't put yourself in a position from the very beginning or from early on in your process, so you don't put yourself in that position to have to reschedule the exam? Now, if it's not one of those things, then it's likely to be something else, right? Something a bit deeper. And that's where we really get into that conversation about fears, fear of failure, perhaps. And the other issue is trust. As I always do, have millions of notes of things I want to talk to you about. So that's what I'm fumbling around with here. So I'd have you ask yourself, what are you afraid of? What are you worried might happen if you go and sit for this test? What we have to get deeper. We have to get beyond, I'm just not feeling ready, because that's the other thing that a lot of times candidates are looking for, is this feeling or this inner sense that in fact I am ready. You may never achieve that. You may never have that, especially if this is your first exam that you're going to sit for, or if you've gone to sit for exams in the past and have not succeeded in passing those exams, right? So in other words, you haven't yet had that sense of what it takes, what is enough studying, right? What is prepared enough in order to pass? Any of those situations, that fear or doubt or uncertainty can creep in, making it almost impossible for us to feel ready. So if that's what you're searching for, again, we may have to put some stronger structures, some more boundaries in place that support you in taking the exam, even if you don't feel ready. Or, what I would actually recommend is finding some ways to measure that are objective, like your test scores on a practice exam or scores on multiple choice, things like that, that are more tangible as opposed to how you're feeling that day. So if you're looking for that feeling of being ready, or not trusting yourself, not trusting your preparation. Again, these are the areas that we need to focus on, not just rescheduling the exam. Let's work on building that trust in yourself to study, to learn, to retain this information, and to perform well on exam day. That's the bigger issue here. That's what we would need to build up, not just address the issue of rescheduling. Because again, you could say, all right, I'm never rescheduling this exam again. This is the day that I'm taking it. But if you address that you don't trust yourself to be able to pass these exams, or you don't trust your preparation, that's going to negatively impact your results as well. So I did hint to, and I want to touch on right now, situations where it does make sense for you to reschedule. And I'll share an example. So I'm working with a client who this is the first exam that she's taken since working with me. And in fact, I don't know that she'd ever sat, or it's been a long time. If she has sat for an exam before, it had been years. So we're basically starting from square one. And we set a schedule from the very beginning. We set her test date. It was very reasonable, we thought. And as we went through, what we discovered is she actually learns best by reading. So she was doing an awful lot of reading, not relying as heavily on the lectures and the other sources from her materials, but mostly reading. What ended up happening is the reading would take a lot longer than we thought, not allowing her a ton of time to practice questions or practice simulations or take mock quizzes. So when we got to about a week out, she was doing simulations and doing some, big sets of questions for the first time. And at that point, we really kind of stepped back and evaluated, is this a smart decision to move forward with this exam as it is scheduled right now or not? And in that case, we decided that, in fact, she hadn't had enough practice. Her scores were not high enough to indicate that she was really exam ready. And for me, I just had, as a coach, I rely a lot on my instincts. And I had this gut feeling that we weren't there yet. I always rely on my client to make the final decision on that or the final call. But I threw it out there and said, would you benefit from another week or 10 days of practice? Really diving into these questions, taking a lot of practice simulations and practice tests. And she agreed. So in that case, because the data was there, we relied on the scores. We also relied on the facts that she had not done a significant portion of multiple choice or simulation questions or had time to take a mock exam. We made that decision to push it out. Yes, it did relieve the pressure, but that actually also created a better environment for her to learn. We felt that making a hard push in a short time frame was going to make it really hard for her to stay focused because, that anytime there's extra pressure or stress, it does not actually help your learning. It impedes your ability to learn and absorb and retain information. So in that case, it was the right decision. But again, we relied on facts. We weren't just relying on how she felt. So those are things to consider and something that I would highly recommend. So again, there are situations where that makes sense. And she passed. So it was a good decision to push it out a week or two in order to really protect. At that point, we're making a decision about protecting the investment you've already made in terms of time and energy in studying the content. So now what to do with this information? If you're not in that situation where you are, where you're actually using data to make that decision that I have to push this back. If you're more in the boat of, I think I'm using this as an excuse, or I think I'm using this as a backdoor exit, then what do we do about that? Number one, we have to understand what is underlying that desire or that gut instinct, that reaction to push the test back. If it is about planning, then we need to learn from that. So as I did with my client in that example, for her next exam, we were a little bit more conservative in how much time we gave her to prepare for the next exam because we knew that, in fact, the reading that she was doing was going to take a bit longer, but it's an approach that works for her. So we wanted to stick with that. If it's if it is for you, the mindset, right? The back door, the safety net, that thing that allows you to release the pressure. There are two things I want you to think about. Number one, what mindset costing you? What's the impact for you of continuing this way with this default mindset that you can always reschedule? I've named a few things, right? It costs you motivation. It allows time for procrastination, which can throw you off track, can make it really hard to get started. If this happens to you once you've already got credit for some exams, then what it can also cost you is valuable time during that 18 months, right? If you find yourself procrastinating or prolonging your exam experience while your credit clock is ticking, it can put you in a situation long term where now you have 2 exams to pass and only 2 months to do it because you let this go on for a long time after passing 1 or 2 exams. And that's not an uncommon thing. I see that a lot, especially if you leave the exam that you're most worried about, right? Most fearful about for at the end. So what is this mindset costing you? We have to bankrupt this idea that this works for you, because in fact, it does not work for you. So that's what you need to do, is build up a case for what this is costing you. What's the impact? And then what's the payoff? We don't do anything as human beings without some sort of payoff or something that we're getting out of it. So what is it? Well, maybe it just releases the pressure. I feel good. I feel like, okay, now I'm in a better place to pass, perhaps, when in reality you're not changing the underlying habits or putting more consistent studying in place, or just releasing the pressure short term. What's the payoff for you? Do you get to blame how busy you are at work or how busy you are as a human, and use that as an excuse for not being more consistent with your studying, for not sticking with your study plan? That sounds harsh, but you've got to be honest with yourself here. What's really going on? What's really holding you back from taking on the exam? And then ultimately, the thing that I find works best, in addition to all of those, right? A solid plan and addressing all of these underlying issues, ongoingly, you have to have a clear why. And the why you're taking this on, the what's in it for you, has to be bigger than your fear of failing, has to be bigger than any negative thing that might happen along the way, whether that is failing or just all the time, social events that you may have to skip, or, those other investments and sacrifices that you make along the way. That why you're taking on the CPA exam has got to be bigger than any sort of fear or unknown, right? It's got to be worth moving through the unknown. It has to be worth taking that risk in order to achieve that for yourself. So, in conclusion, it's never really about, very rarely, I should say, is it about simply rescheduling your exam. It's often about something much deeper. We're going to continue to explore these ideas, these mindsets that are pretty common in these videos weekly on Mondays. So be sure to join us. If you've missed any of the previous week's content, make sure to check that out here on our Facebook page or on our YouTube channel. They're also available on our Instagram, on our IGTV. And if you have topics that you are dying to hear about, if you've got a mindset or a challenge you've been struggling with, send us a message. I would love to hear what those are, and I'd like to dive into those topics. If you like this video, make sure to like, subscribe, follow our page, and you'll be the first to see all of our latest content. And for now, enjoy, take some time to reflect on what we've talked about. If this resonated for you, make sure to go back and watch those parts where I laid out the questions for self-reflection that you can do. And make sure to, really take the time to focus on this, because it will make a huge difference in your overall experience with the exam, as well as the results that you produce. It will help you to stay more consistent. It will help you to stay motivated and overall have a more effective study approach. So I want all of those things for you. Have a wonderful week and a great rest of your day, and I'll see you soon. Bye.